Imagine this. You're elderly, you're feeling unwell. Nothing serious, just the usual aches and pains of getting older. So you call your doctor, the one you've trusted for 15 years, the one who delivered your grandchildren, the one who always has time for a cup of tea and a chat. He arrives at your door with his black medical bag. That familiar, reassuring smile. You let him in without hesitation. Why wouldn't you? He's Dr. Shipman. Everyone loves Dr. Shipman. And within 15 minutes, you'll be dead, murdered, by the man you trusted most. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Harold Shipman, a family doctor in northern England who became the most prolific serial killer in modern history. Over 2 decades, he killed at least 218 people, probably more, many more, and he almost got away with it. Today, we're diving deep into the horror that unfolded behind closed doors in quiet suburban homes. We'll trace his twisted path from respected physician to cold-blooded killer. We'll examine the warning signs everyone missed, the investigation that nearly failed, and the chilling question that still haunts Britain. How many more victims are buried in unmarked graves, their deaths signed off by a monster with a medical degree? Because the truth is darker than you can imagine, and it starts in the most unlikely place. Hyde, Greater Manchester, 1977, a small industrial town where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where the milkman still delivers at dawn, where the local GP is practically family. Harold Frederick Shipman arrived here at age 31, fresh-faced, bearded, eager. He joined a group practice on Market Street. His patients adored him immediately. He was different from other doctors. He made house calls. He sat and listened. He remembered birthdays. Elderly patients especially loved him. He'd spend an hour with Mrs. Jenkins, talking about her late husband. He'd help Mr. Patterson with his crossword puzzle. He'd adjust medications without charging extra visits. Within a few years, Shipman opened his own practice. Demand was so high, he couldn't take new patients. People waited months to get on his list. Mothers requested him specifically for their children. The elderly trusted him completely. And that trust, that was his weapon. Because while Harold Shipman was building his reputation as Hyde's most caring doctor, he was simultaneously becoming Britain's most prolific serial killer. And nobody suspected a thing. Let me take you inside one of his murders. June 19th, 1998. Winifred Arrowsmith is 81 years old, a former counselor, sharp as a tack, independent, lives alone in a neat terraced house. That morning, she's feeling a bit off. Nothing alarming, just breathless. So she calls Dr. Shipman's office. He arrives around 2:30 in the afternoon. Neighbors see him walking up her path, medical bag in hand. They wave. He waves back. Everything seems normal, routine. He lets himself in. She's expecting him. They chat. He takes her blood pressure, listens to her chest. Then he says he needs to give her an injection, something to help her breathing. Winifred trusts him completely. She rolls up her sleeve. He fills a syringe from a small bottle in his bag. Morphine. A massive dose. Enough to kill. He injects it into her arm. She starts to feel strange, dizzy, confused. He tells her to lie down. Within minutes, her breathing slows. Her eyes glaze. He watches, calm, detached, clinical. He's done this so many times, it's become routine. Winifred Arrowsmith slips into unconsciousness. Her heart slows, stops. Harold Shipman checks for a pulse. Nothing. He packs his syringe, adjusts her clothing to make it look like she fell asleep in her chair. Then he walks out, down the path, past the neighbors, drives back to his clinic, and signs her death certificate. Cause of death, coronary thrombosis, natural causes, nobody questions it. She was 81. These things happen. Another elderly woman gone, another murder hidden in plain sight, and Harold Shipman has just killed for the 216th time. But who was Harold Shipman? How does a doctor become a mass murderer? Let's rewind. Born January 1946 in Nottingham. Working class family. His mother, Vera, dominated his childhood. She was fiercely ambitious for her son, told him constantly he was special, different, better than other children. She pushed him hard, and Harold worshipped her. He was a loner at school, awkward, no close friends, but academically gifted. When Harold was 17, Vera was diagnosed with lung cancer, terminal. He watched her deteriorate over months. The only thing that eased her suffering, morphine injections. He'd sit beside her after school, watching the doctor administer the drug, watching the pain melt from her face, watching her relax into relief. Years later, investigators would point to this as the seed, the moment when Harold Shipman learned that morphine equals power, control over life and death, the ability to play God. Vera died when Harold was 17. He was devastated, but he channeled his grief into obsession. He would become a doctor, like the man who'd eased his mother's pain. He studied hard, got into medical school in Leeds, married his teenage girlfriend, Primrose, started a family, became a GP. Everything seemed perfect, except it wasn't. 1975, Harold Shipman is working as a GP in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. He's 29, well-liked, respected. But something's wrong. He's forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful opioid painkiller. He's injecting himself multiple times a day. His colleagues notice he's jittery, sweating. They confront him. He breaks down, admits his addiction. He's convicted of forgery and deception, fined £600, forced into rehab. His medical career should have ended there, but it didn't. After a brief stint working in a non-clinical role, Shipman applied to practice again, and incredibly, the medical board let him. They gave him a second chance, a fresh start. So, in 1977, Harold Shipman moved to Hyde, where nobody knew about his past, where he could rebuild his reputation, and where, most experts now believe, he started killing. Because the pattern is clear. The moment Shipman regained access to patients and drugs, elderly people in his care started dying. At first, just occasionally, then more frequently. By the 90s, he was killing on average one person every 10 days. And still, nobody noticed. How is that possible? How does a doctor murder over 200 people without raising suspicion? The answer is chillingly simple. He chose his victims carefully. Elderly, living alone, often with pre-existing conditions, deaths that wouldn't shock anyone. He visited them at home, away from witnesses. He killed with morphine. Fast, relatively peaceful, mimics natural death. He was the one who signed death certificates, and in Britain, in the 80s and 90s, there was almost no oversight. If a GP certified a death as natural causes, that was it. No autopsy, no questions. The body went straight to the funeral home. Shipman exploited this system perfectly. He was a respected doctor. His word was gospel, and he knew it. He grew bolder, more confident, more reckless. He started forging wills, changing medical records after deaths to make his diagnoses look legitimate. He even attended victims' funerals, comforting grieving families. Can you imagine that? Standing over a grave, consoling the daughter of a woman you murdered days earlier. The audacity, the narcissism, the sheer psychopathy. But it gets worse, because Harold Shipman didn't just kill for medical reasons or mercy. He killed because he enjoyed it. Let's talk about motive. Why did Harold Shipman do this? Forensic psychologists have debated this for decades. Some point to his mother's death, the trauma of watching her suffer, a twisted attempt to spare others that pain. But that theory doesn't hold up, because Shipman's victims weren't terminally ill. They weren't begging for release. Many were in good health. Winifred Arrowsmith had years left. Kathleen Grundy, another victim, was active in her community at 81. He wasn't ending suffering. He was creating it. Other experts suggest a God complex. Shipman saw himself as superior, above rules. He held life and death in his hands, and that power became addictive. There's evidence for this. He kept meticulous records of his kills. He revisited death scenes in his mind. He seemed to relish the control. One detective described it as the ultimate power trip. Shipman decided who lived and who died, and nobody could stop him. But there's another theory. Simpler, darker. Some investigators believe Harold Shipman killed because he liked it. The act itself, watching someone die, the intimacy of those final moments, the godlike control, and the secret knowledge that he'd fooled everyone. Again, this wasn't mercy. This was murder for pleasure, dressed up in a doctor's coat. March 17th, 1998, 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy is found dead in her home, fully clothed, lying on the sofa, like she just fell asleep. Her daughter, Angela Woodruff, is devastated, but not surprised. Her mother was elderly. These things happen. Dr. Shipman signs the death certificate. Cause of death: old age. Kathleen is cremated within days. Case closed. Except Angela Woodruff is a solicitor, a lawyer, and 2 weeks after her mother's funeral, something strange happens. Another solicitor contacts her about a will. Apparently, Kathleen Grundy had made a new will shortly before her death, leaving her entire estate, £386,000, to one person, Dr. Harold Shipman. Angela is stunned. Her mother would never do that. They were close. Kathleen had already made a will, leaving everything to her family. Why would she change it? And why leave everything to her doctor? Angela examines the document. It's crude, typed on an old typewriter, littered with errors. The signature looks traced. Angela's instincts scream forgery, but there's something more, a dark suspicion forming. Could Dr. Shipman have killed her mother? For money? It seems insane. Shipman is a respected doctor, a pillar of the community, but Angela can't shake the feeling. She goes to the police. Detective Superintendent Bernard Postles receives Angela's complaint in July 1998. He's skeptical. A beloved local doctor, a serial killer. It sounds absurd, but Angela is persistent. She's a lawyer. She knows something's wrong, so Postles starts digging. He looks at the will. It's obviously forged. That becomes clear immediately. The typewriter used to write it? It's in Shipman's office. Shipman's fingerprints are on the document. This is fraud, without question. But murder? That's harder to prove. Kathleen Grundy has already been cremated. No body, no autopsy, no evidence. Then Angela makes a crucial decision. She demands her mother's body be exhumed, and incredibly, it is. On August 1st, 1998, Kathleen Grundy's coffin is unearthed. Her body is remarkably well preserved. Toxicology tests are ordered, and when the results come back, detectives are stunned. Morphine, massive levels, lethal levels, far too much for accidental overdose. Kathleen Grundy was murdered, and Harold Shipman is the prime suspect. But here's the problem. One body, one murder. It's not enough. Is Shipman a one-time killer, or is there something darker here? Bernard Postles makes a decision that will crack the case wide open. He launches a full investigation into Harold Shipman's patient deaths. The team starts reviewing death certificates, hundreds of them, and patterns emerge immediately. Deaths spike whenever Shipman is on duty. They drop when he's on holiday. Most deaths occur in the afternoon during home visits. Victims are almost always elderly, almost always alone, almost always seen by Shipman shortly before death, and almost always cremated, destroying evidence. The numbers are staggering. In a typical GP practice, you'd expect about 20 patients to die per year. Shipman's practice, over 50, year after year. The statistical anomaly is impossible to ignore. So police start exhuming bodies. 15 victims are unearthed. Toxicology tests reveal the same thing in every case. Morphine, lethal doses. These weren't natural deaths. They were murders. 15 murders, and that's just the ones they can prove. The realization hits the investigation team like a sledgehammer. Harold Shipman isn't a one-time killer. He's a serial murderer, one of the worst in history, and he's been operating for over 20 years. September 7th, 1998, Harold Shipman is arrested at his clinic. He's charged with the murder of Kathleen Grundy and 14 others. Detectives search his home and office. They find stockpiles of morphine, forged medical records, the typewriter used to fake Kathleen's will, and something else, a pattern of behavior that chills investigators to the bone. Shipman had been systematically altering patient records. After killing someone, he'd go back into their medical files and add fake entries. Patient complaining of chest pain, history of heart problems, creating a paper trail to justify his death certificates. It's premeditated, calculated, methodical. This wasn't a doctor who snapped. This was a man who planned every murder with surgical precision. But when police interview him, Shipman is defiant, arrogant. He denies everything, claims he's being persecuted, that the victims died of natural causes, that he's the victim of a witch hunt. His confidence is unnerving. He genuinely seems to believe he'll get away with it. Even now, even with bodies exhumed and morphine in their systems, he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And that arrogance, that's what dooms him. The trial of Harold Shipman begins on October the 5th, 1999. Preston Crown Court. He's charged with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. The prosecution's case is overwhelming. Toxicology reports, forged documents, statistical evidence, witness testimony. One by one, the families of his victims take the stand. They describe Shipman's house calls, his reassurances, how he told them their loved ones died peacefully, how he comforted them, and how he lied. The courtroom is silent as they speak. Some weep. Others stare at Shipman with pure hatred. And Shipman? He sits impassively, no emotion, no remorse, taking notes like he's at a medical conference. The prosecution argues that Shipman killed for 2 reasons: control and ego. He enjoyed playing God, deciding who lived and died, and occasionally, he killed for financial gain, like with Kathleen Grundy. But mostly, he killed because he could, because it fed his narcissism, because watching someone die gave him a sense of power he craved like a drug. The defense argues it's all circumstantial, that the victims were old and died naturally. That morphine could have been prescribed legitimately, but it's a weak argument, and everyone knows it. January 31st, 2000. After 17 days of deliberation, the jury returns. Guilty on all 15 counts of murder. The courtroom erupts. Families sob with relief. Shipman shows no reaction. He's sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. The judge delivers a scathing statement. You have finally been brought to justice. You have committed some of the most heinous crimes in the annals of British history. Shipman is led away. He'll never be free again. But the case doesn't end there, because 15 victims? That's just the beginning. The British government launches a public inquiry led by Judge Dame Janet Smith. Her mission? Determine the full extent of Shipman's crimes. Over 6 years, the inquiry examines hundreds of deaths, reviews medical records, interviews witnesses, exhumes more bodies, and the findings are staggering. The inquiry concludes that Harold Shipman murdered at least 218 patients, possibly as many as 250 between 1975 and 1998, making him the most prolific serial killer in modern history, not just in Britain, in the world. And the truly horrifying part? Many of his victims will never be identified. Their bodies were cremated, their deaths signed off as natural. No evidence remains, just fading memories and grieving families who will never know the truth. Let's talk about the victims, because they weren't statistics, they were people. Mothers, grandmothers, fathers, friends. Each had a life, a story. Let me tell you about a few. Ivy Lomas, 63 years old. She walked into Shipman's clinic for a routine appointment in May 1997. She was healthy, active, no serious health issues. Shipman called her into his examination room. 10 minutes later, she was dead, killed with a lethal injection while sitting in his office chair. Shipman told staff she'd had a sudden stroke. Nobody questioned it. Then there's Bianca Pomfret, 49, the youngest confirmed victim. A teacher, full of life, she went to Shipman, complaining of a cough, in December 1997. He offered her an injection. She died within minutes. Or Nora Nuttall, 65. Shipman visited her at home in January 1998. He told her daughter he needed to take a blood sample. He injected morphine instead. Nora was dead before her daughter could finish making tea. These women weren't terminally ill. They weren't suffering. They had years left, families who loved them. Shipman stole that for no reason other than his own gratification. And that's what makes this case so uniquely evil. These weren't crimes of passion. They weren't about money or revenge. They were about power, control, and the pleasure of taking life. But here's the question that still haunts Britain. Why didn't anyone stop him sooner? There were warning signs, lots of them. In 1990, a local funeral director named Alan Massey noticed something odd. He was handling a lot of Shipman's patients, more than from any other doctor, and they all died the same way, sitting in chairs, fully clothed, like they just fell asleep. Massey mentioned it to colleagues. They shrugged it off. In 1994, Dr. Linda Reynolds, a fellow GP, became suspicious. She'd seen 15 of Shipman's patients die in recent months. All sudden, all unexpected, she reported her concerns to the local coroner. An investigation was launched, but it went nowhere. Why? Because investigators only looked at cremation forms. They didn't interview families, didn't review medical records, didn't check for patterns. The investigation concluded there was no evidence of foul play. Shipman was cleared, and he kept killing. In 1998, just months before his arrest, a taxi driver named John Shaw raised concerns. He'd driven Shipman to multiple house calls where patients mysteriously died. He told police nothing happened. Why did all these warnings fail? Partly incompetence, partly disbelief, but mostly blind trust in doctors. The idea that a GP could be a serial killer was too absurd to entertain, so people dismissed their instincts, ignored red flags, and Harold Shipman killed another 100 people. Let's go deeper into Shipman's psychology, because understanding how his mind worked is key to understanding how he got away with it for so long. Forensic psychiatrists who studied the case describe Shipman as a textbook narcissist. He believed he was superior to everyone around him, smarter, more capable, above the law. This is evident in everything he did. He kept meticulous records of his kills, not for any practical reason, but because he wanted to remember. To relive the power, he attended victims' funerals, basking in the grief he'd caused. Secure in the knowledge that nobody suspected him, he forged Kathleen Grundy's will in the most obvious way, because he genuinely believed he wouldn't get caught. That arrogance, that narcissism, is what ultimately led to his capture. But there's another layer. Shipman was also a sadist, not in the overt, violent sense, but in a quiet, insidious way. He derived pleasure from the act of killing, from watching life drain away, from the godlike control. Psychologists call it medical murder syndrome. Doctors who kill patients for the thrill disguised as mercy. It's rare, but when it happens, the body count is almost always high, because these killers have unfettered access to victims, trust, drugs, and the perfect cover story. Shipman fit this profile perfectly, and he exploited it to the fullest. Let me take you inside another murder, because understanding his method is crucial. November 10th, 1997. 81-year-old Maureen Ward calls Shipman's office. She's feeling unwell, shortness of breath. Shipman tells her he'll come by that afternoon. He arrives around 3 p.m. Maureen's neighbor sees him pull up. Nothing unusual. He lets himself in with a smile. Maureen is sitting in her living room. He chats with her, asks about her symptoms, takes her pulse. Then he says he needs to give her an injection, something to help her breathing. Maureen hesitates. She doesn't like needles, but she trusts Dr. Shipman. Everyone does. He fills the syringe from a small bottle, 10 milliliters of morphine, enough to kill an elephant. He injects it into her arm. Maureen feels warm, dizzy. Shipman tells her to lie back. Within 60 seconds, her breathing slows. Her eyes lose focus. Shipman watches, calm. He's done this 200 times. He knows exactly what will happen. 2 minutes. Her heart rate drops. 3 minutes. She's unconscious. 5 minutes. Her heart stops. Shipman checks for a pulse. Nothing. He packs his bag, straightens her clothing, calls her daughter, and tells her Maureen has had a massive stroke. Could she come immediately? The daughter arrives in tears. Shipman comforts her, tells her it was peaceful, quick. She didn't suffer. He signs the death certificate, coronary thrombosis, natural causes, and he walks out. Another murder, another lie, another family destroyed, and nobody suspects a thing. But Shipman made mistakes. Small ones at first, then bigger. As his confidence grew, he became sloppy. Take the Kathleen Grundy case. Forging a will was incredibly risky, and doing it so obviously on his own typewriter was suicidal. But Shipman believed he was untouchable. He'd been killing for over 20 years. He'd been investigated and cleared. He thought he was invincible. And that's when predators fall, when arrogance overtakes caution. There were other mistakes too. He altered medical records, but sometimes forgot details. Dates didn't match. Symptoms contradicted his diagnoses. If anyone had looked closely, really looked, they'd have seen the inconsistencies. But nobody did, until Angela Woodruff, a lawyer with the skills and determination to fight back. She's the reason Shipman was caught, not the police, not the medical board. A grieving daughter who refused to accept her mother's death at face value. And that raises a chilling question. How many other Harold Shipmans are out there? Doctors using their position to kill, protected by trust and poor oversight. It's a question Britain grappled with after Shipman's conviction, and the answer led to sweeping reforms. The Shipman inquiry made hundreds of recommendations. Reforms to protect patients, tighten oversight, prevent another monster from slipping through the cracks. Some key changes. Death certificates can no longer be signed by the doctor who treated the patient. There must be independent verification. GPs are now subject to regular appraisal and monitoring. Performance is tracked. Anomalies are investigated. Controlled drugs like morphine are strictly monitored. Doctors must account for every dose, and cremation requires much more scrutiny. Multiple doctors must sign off. These reforms have saved lives, no question. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Systems can only do so much. If a doctor is determined to kill and smart about it, they can still evade detection for a while, maybe even for years. Because trust is fundamental to medicine, patients have to trust their doctors, and that trust will always create vulnerability. The lesson of Harold Shipman isn't that we need to suspect every doctor, it's that we need to empower patients and families to question, to demand answers, to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, because Angela Woodruff did, and it stopped a monster. January 13th, 2004, Wakefield Prison. Harold Shipman is found dead in his cell, hanged. He's used bed sheets to fashion a noose. He left no note, no confession, no apology. He was 57 years old. He'd served just 4 years of his sentence. His suicide sparked outrage. Families of the victims felt robbed of justice. They wanted answers, closure, a confession. They got none. Some believe Shipman killed himself to ensure his wife would receive his pension. If he'd died after age 60, she wouldn't have been eligible. So, even in death, Shipman was manipulating, controlling. Others think he couldn't bear the loss of power. In prison, he was nothing. No longer Dr. Shipman, no longer in control, just another inmate. And for a narcissist like him, that was unbearable. We'll never know the truth, and maybe that's fitting, because Harold Shipman spent his life lying, hiding, manipulating. Why would death be any different? But his suicide left one more wound. It meant many victims would never be identified. Families would never get confirmation. The full truth would die with him, and in a case defined by unanswered questions. That's perhaps the cruelest twist of all. So let's confront the lingering shadows, the questions that still haunt. First, how many did he really kill? The official count is 218, but experts believe it's higher, much higher. Some estimates put the number at 250, others say 300. The truth is, we'll never know. Too many bodies were cremated, too many records were destroyed. Shipman's death closed the book on any hope of a full confession. Second, when did he start? The inquiry concluded his first murder was in 1975, shortly after he started practicing in Todmorden. But some investigators believe it was earlier, during his time in medical school or during his training. There's no proof, but given his psychology, it's plausible. Third, did anyone help him? Almost certainly not. Shipman was a solo operator, a loner, but some have questioned whether his wife, Primrose, knew. She maintained his innocence until her death, never wavered, but she lived with him, benefited from his crimes. Like the forged will, could she really have been oblivious, or did she choose not to see? We'll never know. And finally, are there others like him? Doctors who kill, hidden in plain sight? The answer is almost certainly yes. Medical murders are rare, but they happen, and the systems that failed to stop Shipman exist elsewhere, in other countries, other hospitals. That's the truly terrifying legacy of Harold Shipman. Not just what he did, but the knowledge that it could happen again. Let me bring this back to the human level, because statistics and systems are important. But this case is really about people, about 218 individuals who died terrified and alone, about families torn apart by grief and betrayal, about a community that lost its innocence. Think about the daughter who found her mother dead, comforted by Dr. Shipman, believing her mother went peacefully. only to learn years later that Shipman murdered her. The psychological damage of that revelation is almost unimaginable. Or the son who scattered his father's ashes, never knowing his father was murdered. That Shipman stole his final years. There's no recovering from that, no closure, just a wound that never heals. The victims of Harold Shipman aren't just the people he killed, they're everyone left behind. Families, friends, neighbors, an entire town that has to live with the knowledge that a monster walked among them, smiled at them, murdered their loved ones, and almost got away with it. That's the true horror of this case. Not the body count, but the betrayal, the shattered trust, the realization that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a white coat and carries a stethoscope. Here's what makes Harold Shipman different from other serial killers. Most serial killers are caught within years, sometimes months. They're chaotic, impulsive. They leave evidence. They make mistakes. Shipman killed for over 2 decades. He was meticulous, patient, disciplined. He chose victims nobody would miss, or at least whose deaths wouldn't raise alarms. He used a method that mimicked natural death. He had the perfect cover story, respected doctor, and he exploited a system with almost no oversight. That combination made him nearly unstoppable, but it also reveals something about society, about how much we rely on trust, how we assume people in positions of authority, doctors, teachers, priests, are inherently good, and how dangerous that assumption can be. Because predators know this, they seek out positions of trust specifically because it gives them access, power, cover. Harold Shipman understood this better than anyone, and he used it to become the deadliest serial killer in modern history. That's the chilling lesson here. Evil is often banal, ordinary, hiding behind a smile and a profession, and the only defense is vigilance, questioning, and trusting our instincts when something feels wrong. Let me take you to the aftermath. The years after Shipman's conviction, Hyde, once a quiet town, became infamous overnight. Journalists descended, documentaries were made. The town became synonymous with horror. For the people who lived there, it was unbearable. Many moved away. Those who stayed struggled with guilt, shame. How did we not see? How did we let this happen? Shipman's former patients faced a nightmare. Anyone he'd treated had to wonder, did he try to kill me? Am I only alive because he was interrupted, or because I didn't fit his victim profile? Some demanded their medical records be reviewed. Others lived in denial. The psychological toll was immense. And then there were the families of confirmed victims. Many launched civil suits against Shipman's estate, against the medical practices that employed him. They won, received compensation, but no amount of money could heal the wounds. Some families found solace in advocacy. They campaigned for the reforms that came out of the inquiry, turned their grief into action. Others were destroyed. Marriages fell apart. Suicides followed. The ripple effects of Shipman's crimes continue to this day, a quarter century later, and they'll continue for generations. Why are we still fascinated by Harold Shipman? Why does this case endure? Part of it is the sheer scale, 218 confirmed murders. It's almost incomprehensible, but it's more than that. Shipman represents something primal, a violation of the deepest trust. We trust doctors with our lives. Literally, when that trust is betrayed, it shakes something fundamental. It makes us question everything. Who can we trust? How do we protect ourselves? Are we ever truly safe? And there's the psychological puzzle. Shipman wasn't insane. He wasn't delusional. He knew exactly what he was doing. He chose to kill, methodically, repeatedly, for over 20 years. Why? What drives someone to do that? Psychologists have theories, but no definitive answer, and that ambiguity is haunting. We want to understand, to categorize, to make sense of the senseless. But with Shipman, we can't. Not fully. He took his secrets to the grave. And that's terrifying, because if we can't understand what made him kill, how do we prevent the next one? Let me end with a story, one that encapsulates the tragedy of this case. Marie West, 81 years old. Shipman murdered her in March 1995. Her son Peter adored her, visited every week. When she died suddenly, he was devastated, but he trusted Dr. Shipman, believed his mother had a heart attack. Quick, painless. Peter mourned, moved on as best he could. Then, 4 years later, he saw the news. Dr. Shipman arrested. Multiple murders. Peter's blood ran cold. He called the police, demanded they investigate his mother's death. They did. Exhumed her body, found morphine. Marie West was murdered. Peter's grief turned to rage. His mother's final moments weren't peaceful. She was murdered by a man he'd trusted, a man he'd thanked for caring for her. Peter testified at the trial, spoke about his mother, her life, her kindness, and he looked Harold Shipman in the eye and said, "You stole her from us, and you felt nothing." Shipman didn't react. No remorse, no acknowledgement, just cold, empty indifference. Peter West has spent the last 25 years advocating for victims, fighting for reforms, keeping his mother's memory alive. But he's also haunted by what-ifs, by the knowledge that if he'd questioned, if he'd pushed, maybe his mother would have been Shipman's last victim, not one of 218. That's the burden the families carry, and it's a burden that will never lift. So what's the takeaway? What do we learn from the nightmare of Harold Shipman? First, trust your instincts. Angela Woodruff didn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong, and it saved countless lives. If something feels off, if a death seems suspicious, question it, demand answers. Second, oversight matters. Systems failed spectacularly in this case, but reforms since have made a difference. Accountability, transparency, checks and balances. They're not perfect, but they save lives. Third, evil hides in plain sight. Shipman wasn't a monster in appearance. He was charming, respected, beloved. That's what made him so dangerous. We need to abandon the idea that predators look or act a certain way. They don't. They look like us. And finally, remember the victims. 218 people, each with a name, a story, a family. They weren't numbers, they were human beings, and their lives mattered, their deaths mattered, and ensuring nothing like this happens again, that matters most of all. In the end, the case of Harold Shipman is a reminder of the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lurk behind even the most reassuring facade. He was a doctor, a healer, someone people turned to in their most vulnerable moments, and he used that trust to kill over and over. For decades, the fact that he got away with it for so long isn't just a failure of systems, it's a reflection of our collective unwillingness to believe that someone so trusted could be so evil. But that disbelief cost 218 lives, probably more, and it's a lesson we can't afford to forget. Because the next Harold Shipman is out there. Maybe not a doctor, maybe a teacher, a nurse, a caregiver, someone with access, with trust, with opportunity, and the only way to stop them is to stay vigilant, to question, to listen when something feels wrong. Because the victims of Harold Shipman can't speak, but their story can, and it's screaming a warning we'd better heed. If this story left you shaken, you're not alone. The case of Harold Shipman is one that haunts everyone who encounters it, and unfortunately, he's not the only predator who hid behind a position of trust. In our next video, we're diving into the chilling case of Beverly Allett, the nurse who murdered 4 children and attempted to kill 9 more. Another medical professional, another betrayal of trust, another nightmare hidden in plain sight. If you want to keep uncovering these dark truths, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, because we're not done chasing the shadows, and neither should you. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.